people can start losing weight just by making better decisions.
Motivation is driven from the inside out.
Use flexibility as a tool. Rely on structure when it's helpful.
This is where we discuss the possibilities.
Hey guys, I'm Dr. Kori Propst, Wellness Director and Vice President of the Diet Doc, and I'm here with founder Dr. Joe Klemczewski. And welcome to the Diet Doc Life Mastery Podcast. Today we're going to be discussing macro-based dieting versus intuitive eating.
Mm-hmm.
So, hey, Joe, everyone kind of knows you as the Godfather, the grandfather of flexible dieting, of macro-based dieting. Where did that come from? Should we start there?
We'll stay away from the grandfather term for now. I think all four of my kids could probably make me a grandfather at any point. So we're just going to kind of lay that to the side, and then we'll stick with anything else other than that.
Okay.
But the term flexible dieting and if it fits your macros, all that stuff came way later. I'm just not into that kind of marketing and nomenclature. At least I wasn't back when this was all happening. But it all really started for me as a teenager. I was 11, 12, 13 years old when I started lifting weights, started actually dieting. I wanted to improve my physique, wanted to become a better baseball player, was very interested in gaining muscle. And that led me to the sport of bodybuilding just because I started reading, weightlifting and bodybuilding magazines. So very, very early on, I was already looking at what's in food. Is this good for me? Why? Why not? So by the time I met my first bodybuilding goal of competing in a contest, the goal was to compete before I was 21, made that goal when I was around 15 or 16. I had to have a plan. So I started looking in magazines, following diets and all that good stuff. Fast forward to, I think I was already in physical therapy school. I went to a drug-free bodybuilding show. And I ended up winning my class, winning the overall. And one of the competitors said, hey, you should meet this guy. He knows a ton about nutrition. So he was one of the judges, and he happened to be a personal trainer in Evansville, Indiana, where I hence moved. And he did. He had gone to all the Joe Weider muscle camps back in the 80s and 90s, and he was in with Chris Aceto and all those guys. And so he really had kind of a local reputation of helping bodybuilders get ready for contests. Mm-hmm. So I started working with him, and he simply gave me a plan that was kind of a copy of a copy of a copy of articles in those magazines. And they all back then used the same exchange list information. So it was have this many units or ounces of protein, have this, have that, but you had to pick from these individual lists. And at one point when he was giving me some information for a specific contest, I started asking questions. Why isn't this food on the list? Why isn't that on the list? And just right at that exact same time, food fact panels, nutrition fact panels became legislated as a mandated form of packaging. So all of a sudden you had this universal language. It was already there, but it was now on everything. So I reverse engineered all of the content he was giving me. And I said, well, if you want me to have this much protein or this much carbohydrate, why can't I just pick my source? So this was all the way back in 1993. That's 25 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long. But at that point, it worked for me. I was able to be flexible and eat whatever I want. And 5 years later, I had moved to Evansville. Bought a gym, started working with clients myself. That's where the entire genesis of the Diet Doc and my nutrition practice came from. So I started doing that with clients. And so around 1998 is when I started writing for Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness magazine. That led to other magazines. But you can go that far back 20 years ago and start seeing those early articles about macronutrient-based dieting, flexible dieting, simply looking at a budget of food through those macronutrient profiles.
Awesome. Thanks for taking us through the evolution. It's interesting because macro-based dieting is really just I mean, I see it as probably one of the most popular ways of doing things now when we actually want to lose body fat and get healthier, just because it's scientific. You know, that's what food is made of, right? And so if we want to understand what we're putting into our bodies and if we're fueling appropriately and are we getting enough to accomplish our goals, it just seems like it's common sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't want to get too far off track here, but I'm super interested in the human element of like the conversation between you and your coach at that time, as you were kind of questioning how he's structuring your nutrition and your diet and what that kind of looked like, and what his response was to your changing things around.
Yeah, he's a pretty type A guy, so he initially didn't like me, bucking the system. But as I started explaining this to him, and I was already knee deep in physiology textbooks in college and all of that, and so it made sense to him, and so he kind of just went with the flow. But it's an interesting juxtaposition, because even to this day now, 20 and 25 years later, I don't think there's one clear path or definition that somebody has to abide by. I know for me, when I work with clients of any level, some people really do feel more comfortable starting with a very structured, rigid plan. What he gave me would have been perfect for them because it doesn't take as much thought or work. You just simply buy the foods that are, quote, allowed, and you're on your way. That does not bode well for long-term strategy maintenance, I don't think. You need to understand, or it's at least helpful to understand that language of nutrition so that you can eat more intuitively, but then that intuitive eating is based on something concrete. There's that knowledge of nutrition. You're never just kind of lost in the weeds wondering if what you're doing is the right thing.
So, okay, I like how you put that, because I think a lot of people will pit macro-based dieting against intuitive eating, and I see them working in tandem, and I see benefits of both and how elements within both are going to be crucial if we want to meet our goals the most as successfully as possible. So what is your definition of intuitive eating?
Well, interestingly, even just this year, I've been creating more and more systems and ways of eating, experimenting with different clients, and I've come to a little bit of a new conclusion. I thought starting with a very high amount of structure, this is why I coined the phrase structured flexibility. It's not structure versus flexibility. You need both. As I've said before, structure is the brick of a wall. Flexibility is the mortar. You're not going to have a wall without both. You have to have structure and flexibility. But in my mind, I had almost decided you had to start with as much structure as possible and then graduate toward flexibility. But I'm finding it's almost a personality trait connection. This week, I just started a new client who's overseas. He does a lot of traveling. He's very, very new to dieting, totally, just unexpected type of client. And so I thought I'm going to give him a meal plan and start very basic and move toward macronutrient tracking. But man, he's just super, super type A and does better. Just give me the goals. Give me the numbers I want to hit. I'll use an app, I'll use a calculator, and he's going to town on something I would have considered advanced. And it's just simply he's that disciplined and he likes that analytical type of data.
So some people really gravitate towards the very concrete, black and white, like here are the delineating lines and boundaries that I need to be within. And other people like to have a little bit more space to kind of roam and have a bit more variety. I've worked with a lot of individuals. I completely agree with you there. And just from a personal perspective, I do a lot better with some pretty rigid boundaries.
I know you do. You're a robot.
Differently. And I think some people, if they saw my diet, my nutrition, they would be like, whoa, that's way too rigid for me. I would never be able to do that. I don't want to do that. And yet it feels safe and it feels comfortable for me because I liken a lot of things to cycling these days, but you know, we have the line on the side of the road that we shouldn't go past, right? Because we know that if we do, we're going to decrease our level of safety. But that line doesn't dictate that we ride it. We can go into the center of the lane when it's necessary and appropriate. So we have that level of leeway and flexibility when we need it. And I've heard you say that too, like flexibility and structure, two sides of the same coin. If it's all flexibility, it's just freaking chaos, right? But if it's too much structure, as humans, what do we want to do? If it's too rigid and we don't have any choices at all, then we want to throw our hands up in the air and run. Like, I can't do this. It's too difficult. So getting back to intuitive eating, you know, as I understand it, intuitive eating was, you know, it came about as an alternative to strict, rigid diets. Not macro-based dieting, because macro-based dieting can be as flexible as we want it to be. But intuitive eating really is understanding our bodies. And
there can be a danger there. You made me think of two different clients I'm working with. One just started a couple weeks ago, and she is engaging quite well, you know, having a great time working with her. But this is one of the things she said to me after hiring me, because she needs results. She's not getting them on her own. She started saying, you know what, I love to eat intuitively. I just want to eat when my body's hungry. I want to eat what my body's telling me to eat.
Yep.
And so she started, as you said, rebelling against a little too much structure. And I said, well, all of that is fine, but look where intuitive eating has gotten you to this point. You know, it's not working very well, because even though I can totally respect that you want that intuitive base, you need more structure now so that the intuition you're using is in a nice container that allows for results. We can have a lot of intuitive eating, a lot of flexibility, but we need it between these two lines, as you said, Kori. And I think a better way to explain it is, you know, we are going to come from one of those two operational bases. We just have to be comfortable enough with allowing the other aspect in when we need it. One of our program owners at the Diet Doc is dieting, and I'm helping him get ready for a photo shoot. And he's actually coming to our annual conference in Nashville. And so as he's planning for that, he said, by the way, Joe, I know it's going to be, you know, kind of a hectic schedule. We've got food catered in. We're going out as a group. We're going to have 60 people there, travel. What am I going to do with my macros? What am I going to do with my plan? How do we, you know, change things? And so his question was specifically, do I just suck it up and stick to the macros, or is there a way to add some flexibility? So he's a guy who also thrives on a lot of structure, but he's anticipating a very legitimate need. So we're going to work through that. And that's a great topic maybe for another day, talking about how to change those macros, how to become more flexible, even if you do have to adjust your plan for travel and so forth.
Yeah, I like that. I see in my client work, and tell me if this resonates with you too, the individuals who start saying, you know, I think that maybe a more intuitive way of eating would be best for me, are the ones who are less than effective at finding that personally appropriate balance macro-wise, or they may be binge eating, or they may be emotionally eating, or they're feeling like they're just thinking about food far too much and obsessing. I hear that word a lot. And so they move from macro-based dieting to, I think I just need to eat when I'm hungry and stop when I'm full and listen to my body and what it's telling me to eat and how to eat and when to eat and where to eat. And so to me, it's not necessarily a game of, do I do this or do that? It's what does this person maybe need to learn in terms of their thought process and the way in which they're thinking about food and nutrition and what's appropriate for their body. So the approach in terms of the psychology.
Yeah, to your specific question, I agree. Structure helps everybody. And this is why I said developmentally, I perceive that to be where we all need to start, build that structure, understand it, learn the language, create those habits, then you can add flexibility. And that's, I think, very much to your point. If you start with a personality base that just likes to wing everything, it is going to be way more difficult because we're talking about some pretty concrete math and biological math, which isn't always linear, but still you have a finite amount of calories you're going to expend every day. On average, that's going to be a pretty tight range, for your week or your month. So if you're just kind of winging things by how you feel, I mean, I certainly know my body, quote, tells me to eat a whole lot of chocolate chip cookies and pizza and everything else.
Well, I would be eating all day long. I mean, I have thoughts about food all day long, and it's a matter of like, refocus, bring it back.
So many of the challenges we have is when we have to try and merge the naturalistic elements that 2 to 3 million years of hominid evolution has brought us to, and then the last 100 to 200 years, which is just that much of a fraction of what our body's physically made up to deal with in the environment. All of a sudden, here we are in 21st century America with that kind of historic genetic background, and you can't always be just intuitive. You need also to be cognitive and create some intellectual boundaries.
It's a real challenge when you said context, when environmentally we are in situations that are always telling us to eat. Billboards, TV, just the leaving food on the counter. Every time you go down to your kitchen, if you work from home and you see food, it's going to be right here. So it's no wonder I hear so often, I'm tired of thinking about food. Well, the environment is creating the optimal conditions for that. It's not that there's something wrong with you, and it's not an indicator or a cue that you need to eat intuitively. It's a matter of, go back to get to podcast number 1, which is get a really good sense and start recognizing what are the influences and start observing, and then let's work kind of reverse engineer from there.
Yeah, and I think maybe a good period for the end of the sentence is, instead of just relying on intuition, ironically, when you use your cortex, your cerebral cortex, to create the habits, and you're using proper nutrition principles and your goals, maybe you have a coach helping you understand that kind of physiology, to create the best day, your intuition changes. So consider that for a second. We think we're just a slave to what our body's telling us. We can change what our body's telling us because we're controlling the physiology. As soon as I become much more stable and consistent with my food, those cravings, those hunger, times go away, and we find a much better merge for both sides when we are the one creating and dictating, that nutritional environment.
I like that. Thanks, Joe, for putting that into perspective.
Good deal.
All right. So
we're done? We're done for the day?
That's it. Thanks, guys, for joining us. Macro-based dieting versus, maybe not even versus. How do we merge the two?
Yeah, yes. So, hey guys, one thing to remember, like and share this. We've got our podcast now on many, many platforms. It's on SoundCloud. It's on thedietdoc.com. It's on our YouTube channel, which is the Diet Doc Weight Loss, or the Diet Doc Permanent Weight Loss on YouTube. It's going to be on iTunes pretty soon. So you guys can catch us also on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all that. But we'd love to keep this kind of information flowing out to everybody. So like and share.
Thanks, guys.